Everyone in the neighborhood heard the sound, the low, steady rumble of it wasn't just a motorcycle to me, it was freedom. It was years of sweat, sacrifice, and late nights working extra shifts to finally afford it. But to her, it was just noise, a problem, something she thought she could take. Her name, well, around the block, people just called her Karen. The kind of neighbor who never waved, never smiled, but always noticed, always reported, always demanded. I'll never forget the day it started. The sun was still climbing, painting the street gold, and I was polishing the chrome like it was a crown jewel. My gleamed. My pride sat on that driveway, then her shadow stretched across it. "Nice bike," she said, though the way she said it made the word sound like an insult. I looked up, "Thanks." She didn't smile. Instead, she tilted her head almost like she was appraising it. "My son would love something like this. He's been talking about getting a motorcycle. You really should sell it to him." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her face stayed hard, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't joking. That's when I realized this wasn't admiration. This was the opening shot in a war I didn't ask for. For weeks, little things started happening. Notes left on my door about community standards. Complaints filed with the HOA about noise disturbances. Neighbors whispering about some supposed rule that motorcycles weren't allowed to be stored in driveways. At first, I brushed it off. People talk. Karen complains. Life goes on. But then I caught her son circling my driveway, his eyes locked on mine like a vulture waiting for the right moment. And suddenly the whispers didn't feel like gossip anymore. They felt like plans. One night lying awake, I kept hearing her voice in my head. "You really should sell it to him." No, not sell, not offer. She had said it like an order, like entitlement. And something deep in my gut told me she wouldn't stop at asking. Still, I tried to play it calm. I reminded myself it's just an HOA, they can fine me. They can complain, but they can't touch my bike. At least, that's what I thought. Until the letter came. Folded neatly, official header stamped with authority. A notice of violation. Apparently, I wasn't in compliance with aesthetic guidelines. Apparently, it detracted from community appeal. And apparently, if I didn't remove it from sight, they would escalate further. I stared at the words, my hands shaking with anger. My bike wasn't trash. It wasn't clutter. It was mine. And the idea that someone thought they could dictate what freedom looked like in my own driveway, it cut deep. I wanted to storm over to her house that night, slam the letter down, and demand answers. But I didn't, because sometimes the loudest move you can make is silence. Instead, I tucked the letter away, and I waited. But Karen didn't. The next morning, I found her standing in front of my house again, arms crossed, that same cold stare. "You'll be getting more of those," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "Unless you do the right thing, sell the bike to my son, make this easier on everyone." I couldn't believe the audacity. My chest burned, my fists clenched, but I just said, "It's not for sale." Her smirk told me she'd already decided otherwise. And when she turned away that morning, I knew. This wasn't just about rules. This wasn't just about a motorcycle. This was about power, about someone who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't alone. What she didn't know was that I had someone in my corner who could turn her entire game upside down. The state attorney. And soon enough, she'd regret every single step she took toward my driveway. The knock on my door was sharp, almost violent. It was the kind of knock that doesn't ask, it demands. I opened it, and there she stood again, her son behind her. He was taller than her, broad-shouldered, but his eyes were restless, twitching toward the gleaming in my driveway. "You've had enough time to think," Karen said, her tone dripping with authority she didn't have. "This neighborhood has rules, and your bike doesn't belong here. It's dangerous, it's noisy, and it lowers property values." Her son smirked, almost rehearsed. "Or," he added, "you could sell it to me, problem solved." I stared at them both, trying to understand what kind of reality they lived in where this was a reasonable conversation. My wasn't an eyesore, it was a piece of my soul. And yet here they were, acting as though they were offering me some grand favor by taking it off my hands. I could shouted, I could slam the door, but instead I asked one simple question. What makes you think you can take what isn't yours? For a second her face faltered, just for a second. But then the mask slipped back on and she leaned in close. Because the rules are on my side, and people like you don't win against people like me. That line, it stuck with me, because I'd heard it before, not from her but from life itself. Growing up, I didn't come from much. I worked jobs that broke my back just to get by. I knew what it felt like to be underestimated, overlooked, and pushed around. And maybe that's why the meant so much. It wasn't just metal and rubber. It was proof. Proof that I could fight, save, and finally win something for myself. And I wasn't about to let her take that proof away. Still, I held my tongue. I let her believe she'd scared me. I let her think her words had weight. Because sometimes the best way to win a battle is to let the enemy think they're winning first. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel eyes on me, curtains shifting, neighbors looking away when I waved, whispers floating through the air like smoke. It was as if the whole street had been drafted into her war, whether they wanted it or not. Then came the moment I'll never forget. I was walking back from the mailbox when I heard the sound. Sirens, louder, closer. My stomach dropped as the flashing lights turned the corner, stopping right in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, calm but firm. One approached me while the other scanned the driveway. His eyes landed on the... "Sir," the first officer said, "we received a complaint about a stolen vehicle being housed on this property." The words hit me like a punch. Stolen? I laughed, thinking it had to be a mistake, but then I saw her, standing at the edge of her lawn, arms folded, smiling like the devil had just granted her a wish. Karen. She had called the cops. For a second, rage bubbled in my chest. How far was she willing to go? But beneath that rage, there was something else. A strange, steady calm, because while she thought she was winning, while she thought she had cornered me, she didn't know the truth. The officer asked for my paperwork, title, registration, proof of ownership. I handed it over without hesitation. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. And while they walked back to their cruiser to run the numbers, I caught Karen's eyes. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because the look on my face told her everything. This wasn't going to end the way she thought. The officers returned, their expressions softer now. "Everything checks out, sir. Sorry for the inconvenience." They turned to her. "Ma'am, filing false reports is a serious matter. This isn't the way to handle disputes." Her smile faltered just for a flicker, but she didn't back down. She doubled down. "You don't understand," she snapped. "That bike doesn't belong here. He's violating HOA rules. You need to do something." The officers exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that said they'd seen this 100 times before. Then one of them told her, "Ma'am, HOA rules are not criminal law. This isn't a police matter." And in that moment, something shifted. For the first time, I saw fear flash across her face. Not much, but enough. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the HOA's fight had limits, and mine didn't. I had the state attorney on my side. And soon, she would learn just how costly her war against me would become. The silence after the police left was heavier than the sirens had been. I still sat in the driveway, polished, gleaming, defiant. But I could feel the shift in the air. She wasn't finished. Karen never was. That night I sat at the kitchen table, the letter from the HOA spread out in front of me. The words blurred as I stared, replaying the look on her face when the officers told her HOA rules weren't law. That crack in her armor, it was small, but it was there. Still, I knew better than to relax, because people like her don't stop when they're told no. They look for another door, another angle, another way to twist the knife. And sure enough, I didn't have to wait long to find out what hers would be. The next HOA meeting. I'll never forget walking into that room. Fluorescent lights buzzing, rows of folding chairs, neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder. Faces I'd mowed lawns beside, people I'd waved to on morning walks. But now their eyes were wary, uncertain, not friendly, not hostile, just caught in the middle. At the front of the room sat the board, and next to them, like she owned the place, was Karen. Clipboard in hand, lips pursed, eyes sharp. She stood before anyone else could speak. "We cannot ignore this any longer," she declared, her voice rising. "That motorcycle is a violation of our standards. It lowers property values, it disrupts the peace, and it sets a dangerous precedent. If we let one person break the rules, what's next? Junk cars, trailers, boats." Murmurs rippled through the room, some nods, some frowns, but no one challenged her. No one spoke for me. I felt my chest tighten, heat climbing my neck. Because in that moment I wasn't just fighting for I was fighting for the right to exist in my own home without being treated like an outsider. When they finally gave me the floor, I stood slowly, my voice steady even as my hands trembled. "This bike isn't junk, it's not a toy, it's part of who I am. I've worked for it, I've paid for it, and I've followed every law that matters. The only reason this is even an issue is because one person decided she wanted it gone. Or worse, wanted it for herself." Gasps, shifts in chairs, eyes darting to Corinne, her face flushed, her jaw tight. "That is a baseless accusation," she snapped. But the silence that followed wasn't on her side. For the first time, people weren't nodding. They were thinking, doubting. And in that silence, I realized something. She wasn't invincible, she wasn't untouchable, she was just loud. The board promised to review the matter and move forward with appropriate action. Which, of course, was their way of saying they'd send more letters, more fines, more threats. But I was ready now. Because the truth was, I had already made a call. Not to a lawyer I couldn't afford, not to a friend who'd just tell me to let it go. No, I had reached out to someone who actually had the power to put the HOA in their place. The state attorney. I still remember the sound of his voice when I explained everything. Calm, patient, but with an edge like he'd heard stories like mine too many times before. "You've kept the paperwork?" he asked. "Every letter," I said. "Every notice, even the one where they claimed I wasn't in compliance with aesthetic standards." He chuckled softly. "Good, don't throw anything away. They think they're untouchable, but they're not. Trust me, you've got more rights than they do." That call, it changed something in me. For the first time since this mess started, I felt like I wasn't just defending myself. I was preparing to fight back. But if I thought Corinne was dangerous before, I hadn't seen anything yet. The very next day, I found a bright orange sticker slapped across my gas tank. "Violation," it screamed in bold letters. No explanation, no signature, just the word like a scar. I peeled it off slowly, my hands shaking with fury. She had crossed a line. She hadn't just complained, she hadn't just threatened. She had touched what was mine. And as I stood there holding that torn sticker, one thought burned in my mind. She thought she could scare me, she thought she could shame me, but she had no idea what was coming. Because when the law is on your side, the louder they scream, the harder they fall. The fine came first. A crisp white envelope tucked neatly into my mailbox as though it were just another piece of junk mail. But the number printed inside was no joke. $500, due immediately. Failure to comply will result in further action. I stared at it for a long time, my knuckles whitening around the paper. $500, for what? For owning something I worked my whole life for refusing to bend to a neighbor who thought she could bully me. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the message. They wanted me scared, they wanted me cornered, and most of all, they wanted me to give up. I walked outside, the letter still in my hand, and there she was watering her flowers like she didn't have a care in the world. She glanced up, her lips curling into that smirk I'd come to hate. "Looks like the board agrees with me," she said, voice dripping with triumph. "Might be cheaper to just sell it to my son. You'll save yourself the trouble." I didn't answer, not with words. I just looked at her, really looked at her. And I realized something in that moment. People like her don't just want control. They want the satisfaction of seeing you break. And that was something I refused to give her. Instead, I went inside and called the state attorney again. This time, I read the letter aloud. He sighed long and heavy. Classic tactic. They hit you with fines, hoping you'll fold before you learn the truth. But here's what they don't want you to know. Half of these fines aren't enforceable, and if they push too far, they're breaking the law, not you. Those words lit something inside me. A fire, a calm, steady fire. because it meant the game had shifted. They thought they were tightening the noose, but really they were just wrapping the rope around their own necks. Still, the days that followed weren't easy. More letters, more fines. My neighbors started avoiding me, afraid to be seen choosing sides. Some looked at me with pity, others with annoyance, like I was the one disturbing the peace. And that's when doubt crept in. Late at night, lying awake, I wondered if maybe I should just parked in the garage, hidden it, kept my head down. Was pride worth all this? But then I'd remember the long hours I worked. The nights I skipped meals to save a little more. The moment I first heard the engine roar to life and felt, for the first time in my life, like I had built something just for me. And every time those doubts came, I reminded myself, it wasn't just a bike, it was proof I mattered. The HOA didn't see it that way. One morning, I walked out to find a tow truck idling at the curb, its orange lights flashing. My heart stopped cold. The driver stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Got a call about a vehicle removal," he said. My voice caught in my throat. "From who?" He shrugged. "HOA office, said this bike's a violation." Before I could answer, I heard her voice. Sweet, fake, dripping with victory. "Finally, took you long enough." Karen stood at the edge of her driveway, her son grinning beside her like it was Christmas morning. For a split second, panic flared in my chest. What if they took it? What if this was it? But then calm. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a contact I never thought I'd need, and pressed call. "State Attorney's office," the voice answered. I explained everything, the tow truck, the call, the claim, and then I handed the phone to the driver. He listened for less than a minute before his face changed. He looked at me, wide-eyed, then back at his truck. "Sorry, man," he muttered, shaking his head. "They don't have the authority, I can't touch it." He climbed back into his cab, started the engine, and drove away. I turned slowly, letting my eyes lock on hers. Karen's smile was gone. Her son's grin had crumbled. And for the first time since this war began, she looked afraid. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because people like her, when you take away their illusion of power, they don't back down, they get desperate. And desperate people, they're dangerous. The quiet after the tow truck left should felt like victory. I was safe. The state attorney had my back. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. But peace never lasts long when someone like Karen is plotting next door. The very next day, I noticed it. A flyer taped to my mailbox. Another shoved under my doormat. And when I walked the block, I saw them on lamp posts, on fences, even stuck to the community bulletin board at the park. A picture of my, bold letters screaming, "Noisy, unsafe, does belong here." And under it, in smaller print, "Do you want this lowering your property values? Call the HOA today." I ripped one down, my hands trembling. Neighbors passed by, their eyes darting to the flyer, then to me, then away again. No one said anything. They didn't have to. The message was clear. Karen was turning the neighborhood against me. That night, sitting on my porch, I watched cars slow as they passed my house. Windows cracked, voices whispering. Kids pointed. Parents hushed them. And for the first time, I didn't just feel angry, I felt isolated. Because this wasn't just about a motorcycle anymore. It was about reputation, about dignity. And when someone takes that from you, it cuts deeper than any fine. I called the state attorney again, told him about the flyers. His voice was steady, reassuring. "Defamation," he said simply. "She's walking a thin line. Keep one of those flyers, don't destroy the evidence. The more she digs, the deeper the hole she's in." So I saved one, tucked it in a folder with every letter, every notice, every scrap of paper this HOA war had birthed. A record, a shield. But Karen wasn't done. The following week, I got an email from the HOA board, a notice of mandatory mediation. They wanted me to sit in a room with them, her included, and resolve the matter. Resolve, I almost laughed at the word. To them, resolve meant surrender. It meant bowing my head, signing the bike away, and pretending it was my choice. But I showed up, not because I planned to give in, but because I wanted them to see I wasn't afraid. The room was small, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. At the table sat the board members, their faces tired and wary. And right in the center, like a queen on her throne, was Karen, clipboard, pen, that same smug smirk. She wasted no time. "We've been more than patient," she began. "This homeowner has refused to comply with repeated notices. His motorcycle is a nuisance, a danger, and a violation of our standards. If he truly cared about this community, he'd do the right thing and remove it, or sell it to someone who would actually take care of it." Her son sat in the back corner, silent but grinning. The board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. When it was my turn, I stood, calm, clear. "I've followed every law," I said. "My registration is valid, my title is clean. The police already confirmed that nothing here is stolen. This isn't about community standards. This is about one neighbor trying to take something that isn't hers." Karen slammed her pen down, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "Lies, you're twisting this. That bike is." But I didn't flinch. I reached into my folder and pulled out the flyer, held it high for everyone to see. This came from her, plastered across the neighborhood. My property, my name dragged through the mud. If anyone here doubts what's really going on, look no further than this. Silence, thick, heavy. The board members looked at one another, their faces pale. Karen stammered, reaching for words, but for once none came. I didn't press, I didn't need to, because sometimes the truth doesn't need volume, it just needs to be seen. When the meeting ended, no one spoke to me, but they didn't speak to her either, and as I walked out, I caught her son's eyes. The grin was gone. For the first time, it wasn't me on the defensive, it was them. But I knew this wasn't the end, not yet, because people like Karen don't stop when they're cornered, they lash out, they go lower, they burn the whole house down if it means not losing. And somewhere deep down, I could feel it. The worst was still coming. The night it happened, the air was too still. No breeze, no crickets, just a heavy silence pressing against the walls of my house. I should known something was coming. I was half asleep when the sound jolted me awake. A metallic scrape. The kind of sound you don't forget once you've lived through trouble. My chest tightened as I threw the blanket aside and rushed to the window. And there it was. My pride, my freedom, and two shadows crouched beside it. One held a crowbar, the other a gas can. My heart stopped cold. The porch light snapped on as I bolted outside, shouting before I even reached the driveway. "Hey!" They froze, heads whipping toward me. One of them, the smaller one, dropped the crowbar and bolted into the night. The other lingered a moment longer, just enough for me to see his face, his smirk, his eyes. "Her son." He spat on the ground, then sprinted after his accomplice, leaving the gas can rolling in the dirt. I stood there, my pulse hammering, my hands shaking as I stared at the chrome was scratched. The tank dented where the crowbar had struck, but it was still standing, still mine. And in that moment, the anger I felt wasn't just fire, it was something deeper, something heavier. Because this wasn't about HOA letters anymore. This wasn't about noise or rules, this was destruction, malice, a crime. The police arrived minutes later, their flashlights sweeping across the driveway, their notepads filling with details. They asked questions, took the gas can as evidence, and when I told them whose son it was, their faces hardened. "We'll be speaking with him," one officer said flatly. Across the street, I saw a curtain shift, and then her, Karen, standing in the dark, her face pale, her eyes wide. She didn't come over, she didn't say a word, but I knew she'd seen, she knew what her son had done. And for the first time, she didn't look smug, she looked scared. That night, sitting beside running my fingers over the dented tank, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Rage, yes, but also grief, because the bike wasn't just damaged metal, it was a piece of me, by someone who had no right to touch it. I thought about giving up. About selling it, fixing the damage, walking away from the war that had consumed my life. But then I remembered every sacrifice, every late night, every paycheck stretched thin to make it mine. And I realized, walking away would mean letting them win. The next morning, the HOA board sent me another letter, but this time it was different. Due to escalating incidents, it read. "The presence of your motorcycle is deemed a danger to the community. If not removed within 7 days, legal action will be pursued." I almost laughed when I read it. Legal action. As though I were the one breaking the law, as though their son hadn't just tried to destroy my bike. But I didn't laugh long, because behind the absurdity was a threat, a real one. They were preparing for a final strike. So I prepared too. I met with the state attorney in person this time, bringing my folder thick with evidence. Every letter, every fine, every flyer, even the police report from the attempted vandalism. I laid it all on his desk like cards in a high-stakes game. He read quietly, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. Finally, he looked up at me. "They've crossed the line," he said. "And not just once. You've got a case here. Harassment, defamation, even attempted property damage. If they push this, they won't just lose. They'll pay." His words were steady, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that can silence the loudest neighbor. And as I walked out of his office, the folder lighter in my hands, I realized something. For weeks I'd been playing defense, surviving her attacks, waiting for the next blow. But now the tide was turning. And soon, Karen and her son would learn a truth they had spent their lives ignoring. When you build your power on fear and lies, all it takes is one moment of truth to bring it all crashing down. The letter came on a Friday. Thick envelope, certified mail, the kind of delivery that feels heavier than paper should. Inside was exactly what I expected, and everything I'd been waiting for. The HOA, with Karen's fingerprints all over it, was officially filing for legal action. They wanted my removed, they wanted fines enforced, they wanted me punished. But they had no idea what they were walking into. I sat there at the kitchen table, the letter spread out beside my coffee, and for the first time since this war began, I smiled. Because this wasn't a threat anymore. This was an opportunity. Their arrogance had handed me the very stage I needed to expose everything. When I called the state attorney and read him the letter, he didn't sound surprised. "Good," he said simply. "This is exactly what we wanted. Now we take it to court." That word court, it carried weight. It wasn't a boardroom with folding chairs and whispered complaints. It wasn't neighbors trading gossip by their mailboxes. It was real, binding, and final. The weeks that followed moved like a storm. Papers filed, depositions scheduled, evidence compiled. I turned over everything, the flyers, the fines, the police report, even the dent on this tank. Every scar told a story, and every story pointed back to them. Karen didn't hide during that time. If anything, she got bolder. She strutted through the neighborhood, her son trailing behind, her voice loud enough for me to hear as I polished the bike in my driveway. "You'll lose," she sneered one afternoon. "You'll wish you listened to me when you had the chance. Nobody goes against this HOA and wins." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because deep down I could see it in her eyes, fear buried beneath all that arrogance. The day of the hearing, the room was colder than I expected. A courtroom stripped of warmth, just polished wood and echoing silence. I sat on one side, the state attorney beside me, his presence steady as stone. On the other side, Karen and the HOA board. Her son sat in the back row, arms crossed, eyes darting. The judge entered, and just like that, it began. The HOA spoke first. Their lawyer painted me as reckless, disruptive, a man clinging to a toy that endangered the harmony of the community. Karen nodded along, her expression smug, her eyes flicking toward me as if daring me to break. Then it was our turn. The state attorney rose slowly, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. He laid out every piece of evidence one by one like stones in a foundation. The flyers, the false police report, the fines with no legal basis, and finally the attempted vandalism, the crowbar, the gas can, the police report nomming her son. The room shifted. Board members glanced at each other, their faces paling. Even the judge leaned forward, his brows furrowed. And then the attorney delivered the final blow. "This case isn't about a motorcycle," he said. "It's about harassment, it's about abuse of power, and it's about a homeowner who has been targeted, intimidated, and publicly humiliated because his neighbor believed she could take what was never hers. That is not law. That is not order. That is theft disguised as authority. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face flushed red, her composure cracking as she whispered harshly to her lawyer. Her son shifted uneasily in his seat, his cocky grin gone. And in that moment I knew the truth had landed. The judge spoke next, his tone firm, deliberate. He called the HOA's fines unenforceable. He called the flyers defamatory. He called the attempted destruction of my a criminal matter. And finally, he ordered the HOA to cease all action against me and to cover my legal costs. It was over. I sat there stunned. Weeks of fear, anger, and exhaustion melted all at once, leaving only a strange, quiet relief. My wasn't just safe, it was vindicated. My fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was proof that sometimes the little guy wins. As the gavel fell, I looked across the room. Karen's face was frozen, her jaw tight, her eyes wide. For the first time, she didn't look powerful, she looked small. And in that silence, I realized something. Sometimes the strongest victories aren't loud. They don't come with cheers or applause. They come in the quiet when the truth finally drowns out the noise. The neighborhood never felt the same after that day in court. The flyers disappeared overnight. The whispers stopped. The board, once so eager to back Karen, suddenly found excuses to stay quiet, their authority clipped by the very judge they thought would side with them. And Karen. She didn't strut anymore. She moved like a shadow, quick trips from her door to her car, sunglasses hiding the shame on her face. Her son stopped circling my driveway, stopped grinning, stopped looking at my like it already belonged to him. Funny thing about bullies, they thrive in the spotlight. But once the light turns against them, once everyone sees who they really are, they shrink, they vanish. The still sat in my driveway, dented but still mine. I ran my hand across the tank one evening, the sun catching the scratches the crowbar left behind. At first I thought about repairing them, about restoring the bike to its perfect, gleaming self. But then I stopped. Because those scars told a story. My story. A story of standing firm when the world wanted me silent. A story of not letting entitlement and arrogance strip me of what I had worked so hard for. And in their own way, those scars made the even more beautiful. Neighbors began approaching me again. Slowly, cautiously, some offered quiet apologies. We didn't know how bad it was, they admitted. Others gave me nods of respect, as if to say, you didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? If Karen had won, if the HOA had stripped me of my rights, what would stop them from going after someone else? A boat, a work truck, a flag, a garden, anything that didn't fit their picture of control. That's the thing about standing up. It's never just about you. One night I took the out for a ride. The engine roared, echoing through the streets not as defiance but as freedom, as truth. As proof that I was still here, still standing, still unbroken. I passed Karen's house. Curtains drawn, lights off. No sign of her, but I didn't need to see her to know she heard it. And maybe, just maybe, she finally understood some things can't be stolen, fined, or bullied away. When I pulled back into my driveway, I sat on the bike a moment longer, staring up at the quiet sky. The fight had cost me sleep, peace, and trust, but it had also given me something I hadn't expected. Strength. Not the kind you measure in muscles or horsepower. The kind you measure in resolve. The kind that teaches you to keep standing, even when it feels like the ground is shaking beneath you. Because sometimes dignity doesn't look like pride. It looks like patience. Sometimes victory doesn't sound like cheering. It sounds like silence, the kind that falls when the truth finally wins. As I shut off the engine, the ticking softly in the cool night air, I thought about that first morning she stood in my driveway. The way she said, you really should sell it to him. I smiled. Because the truth is, she was right about one thing. I really should do something with it. But not for her, not for her son, for me, for the road ahead. And as long as I was alive, no one, not an HOA, not a bully, not a Karen with a clipboard, was ever going to take that away. The story ended, and the neighborhood, it learned something it should known all along. Sometimes, the loudest voice isn't the one shouting rules. Sometimes it's the one that refuses to be silenced.